बिस्मिल्लाहिर्रहमानिर्रहीम कालू सुब्हानक ला इल्मा लना इल्ला मा अल्लमतना इन्नका अंतल अलीमुल हकीम. In the last lectures we discussed the basic aspects of modes of ventilation and effect on the body. Now today we will be talking about the physiological effect of ventilation on the different systems of the body. This is more important than knowing the technique of ventilation. There are two basic methods of ventilation. One is patient is breathing spontaneously. There are two methods of breathing: spontaneous ventilation or negative pressure ventilation. As we discussed in the last lecture, that is, there is a difference. Spontaneous means you create a negative pressure in the thorax when you want to breathe in. Our chest is pulled out, and that creates a negative pressure in the pleural cavity. That creates a subatmospheric pressure in the respiratory system, and that creates a pressure gradient in the atmosphere and inside the lung, and the gases due to pressure gradient goes into the lung. When the chest wall inspirating muscles, they stop contracting, then the chest comes back, it creates positive pressure into the airway, and again this creates a pressure gradient and gases come from the lung out to the atmosphere. So this is spontaneous breathing. Now the other is positive pressure ventilation. When you put the patient on a ventilator, gases go into the lung again because of pressure gradient, but we create positive pressure in the mouth or in the tube through the ventilator as compared to the pressure already present in the lung. Again, the gases due to pressure gradient go into the lung, and during expiration, gases come out from the lung to the atmosphere. So this is ventilation. So that was respiration, this is ventilation. Now again, positive pressure ventilation is of two types. One is low frequency positive pressure ventilation, which we normally do. But there is another variety which is called high frequency positive pressure ventilation. Now these two things and their effect on the different systems of the body, will be discussing it today. Now basic principle of change. What happens when we put the gas into the lung? So it creates positive pressure in the thorax, in the thoracic cavity. It means it will create the pressure gradient between the thorax and the abdominal, viscera or abdominal contents. That's called transdiaphragmatic pressure gradient. And that makes the effect on the organs in the abdomen. And that has got physiological effect on the organ, which we will be discussing just now. Again, you have got a positive pressure in the thorax as compared to extrathoracic area. That creates also problem by hindering the venous return, and that have got positive effect on the brain also. So this is the culprit is there is a positive pressure into the thorax that creates a pressure gradient between transdiaphragmatically or between the thorax and the extrathoracic area. Now all these things, when we put the gas into the lung, we think we are putting the gas into the lung and it is going into all parts of the lung. It's not true, because it depends on the time constant. I have been repeatedly using this word, time constant. Time constant is nothing but it's a product of resistance and compliance. Resistance, which is offered for the gas to flow, go to the lung, different parts of the lung, and the compliance is how expansile is the lung, elasticity of the lung. It depends on the elasticity of the lung. So the area which has got more compliance or there is less resistance, that will be getting more gases into that part lung as compared to the lung which is diseased, which has got high resistance and low compliance. So we think we are putting 500 ml into the lung and that's all right. So we have pressed the button. But we might be creating the different flow of gas, different volume of gases going into different parts of the lung. So for that reason we should be knowing about the resistance and the compliance. Compliance is nothing but volume change per unit change in pressure. If I'm ventilating a person with 10 centimeter of water, if I increase from 10 to 11 centimeter of water, how much volume will be increased? That is compliance. And the normal compliance of both lungs is 0.2 liters. 0.2 liters means 200 cc. So individual lung, if you divide it by 2, it is a 0.1 liter or 100 cc. Now on right side you have got 3 lobes, and if you divide it by 3, it becomes 0.33 mils. And if on the left side there are 2 lobes, and you divide it by 2. So same way, so you can calculate the compliance of each lobe of the lung. So this compliance and the resistance, they affect the distribution of the gases in different parts of the lung. If there is a problem in the time constant, there will be uneven compliance, uneven resistance, so there will be uneven distribution. So that's why looking at the compliance and resistance, we have been, they have done the research, and they have put one patient on 2 ventilators. Instead of putting 2 patients on 1 ventilator, they have put 1 patient on 2 ventilators, having a tube in each lung. Even they have gone up to, I've seen one patient being put on 5 ventilators, because we have got 5 lobes, 3 on this side, 2 on this side. So 5 lobes. So every lobe has a different compliance and resistance according to that time constant. So they put the catheter in all the lobes and put 5 ventilators, and the patient survived. Because ventilation is related to perfusion also. So ventilation perfusion should be normalized. So if you can't ventilate properly one lobe due to difference in time constant, so we cannot have a normal ventilation perfusion. So there will not be proper diffusion of the gases. Diffusion of gases means there will not be proper oxygen passing through the alveolar capillary pathway going to the blood. And carbon dioxide will not be coming back and being put out in the atmosphere. So its time constant is a very important thing. Time constant is nothing but it is a product of compliance and resistance, right? Now, what is the solution of this thing? They try to look at the flow, that we should have a different pattern of flow to avoid these complications, small complications. They said we should give accelerating type of flow or decelerating of type of flow, or in some ventilators they combined it. So these are the company people who played in the construction of the ventilators. Accelerating flow means you gradually increase the flow, reach to the peak, then inspiration is finished, and then expiration starts, and then again inspiration starts. So it means you gradually increasing the flow, so that will have a low mean airway pressure if you have accelerating flow. So that will create low mean airway pressure, that's a good thing. Then it will have a least change in the circulation. So it will not have an effect much on the pulmonary circulation. That's also good, but lead to uneven distribution. So that's no solution. They try to do this. You have got a provision in some of the ventilator to have a different type of flow also, accelerating and decelerating. If you're using decelerating, it means you give flow quickly and then gradually you reduce the flow. So you will have a more even distribution with this, but there will be highest mean airway pressure, because when you put the gases with a high flow into the lung, so it will create a pressure. So we'll have a mean airway pressure greater than which we'll get with the accelerating flow. And there will be change in the capillary blood flow. If you increase the flow into the lung quickly, the bigger vessel will dilate, smaller vessel will be elongated, that will create the resistance to flow. So there will be pulmonary hypertension will be induced in those patients. Right, that's not a good thing. Again, so considering these both, they said we don't get the actual benefit which we want to have. Why not to combine both? So even then, that did not give any good answer. So it means that only flow is not a solution for nullifying the bad effects of ventilation. But what actually do? What are the pulmonary changes? If you put the patient on a low frequency positive pressure ventilation, low frequency means which we are giving normal respiratory rate, 12 to 16 or 10 to 15 or up to 20, 25. So this is low frequency positive pressure ventilation. There will be fall in FRC, functional residual capacity. It will have an effect of fall. So for the fall, because you have to actually, the objective of having a good ventilation and having a good diffusion across it, you need to increase the FRC. But with this, if you are doing only positive pressure ventilation, low frequency, it will reduce the functional residual capacity, and there will be uneven distribution going into different parts of the lung, going more. If you look at this, you immediately, if you revise your physiology of respiration, John West classified the lung into three portions: upper part of the lung, middle part of the lung, and lower part of the lung, according to ventilation perfusion. In upper part of the lung, if I'm sitting or if I'm standing like this, in upper part of the lung, there is more gases are going there as compared to blood. Due to gravitational effect, less blood is going into the upper part of the lung. It means ventilation perfusion ratio will be increased. You will have a dead space effect. It means the gases and the blood, they will not come in contact properly. So it means there will be dead space effect. If you go into middle part of the lung, this is according to John West classification. Now, when perfusion is better than the upper part of the lung and ventilation is slightly less than the upper part of the lung, so ventilation perfusion ratio is compatibly with each other, you will have a better ventilation perfusion ratio. When you go into the lower lobe or lower part of the lung, there is due to gravity, there is more blood going there as compared to the gases which are going into lung. So it means ventilation and perfusion ratio will be reduced because there will be less ventilation, more perfusion. You will have a shunting effect. You will not have a dead space effect, you will have a shunting effect. It means that's again not ideal. Now, if the person is lying flat, so then the zones become like this. The upper portion will have more ventilation as compared to perfusion. Middle portion will have a ventilation perfusion ratio normal. Then in lower portion, you will have more perfusion as compared to ventilation. There will be shunting effect. If you put the patient into prone position, now the same will be on the posterior part of the body. There will be more ventilation than perfusion. Then the middle part will be the same, and the lower part now, which was anterior, will have more perfusion as compared to ventilation. So that is the advantage we get when we put the patient in a prone position. All the secretions and other things which were corrected in the posterior part of the lung when the patient is lying supine, now we have made the posterior part as the anterior part. So they can be drained out very nicely and those lungs can be opened up, right? So this is the John West classification. It's very logical and physiologically it's very beneficial to treat the patient looking at the John West classification. Now there will be more uneven ventilation in different parts of the lung, and if you look at the dead space, when you're putting positive pressure, so there are chances of having dead space effect more as compared to perfusion, as compared to total tidal volume. So VD over VT. VD is the gas which is present in the conducting pathway which does not come in contact with the blood. That is up to 16th generation of the lung, up to respiratory bronchiole. That part is called dead space part anatomically. Then from the respiratory bronchiole onward up to the alveoli, up to 16th generation, up to 23rd generation, there is a actual respiratory part where the blood and gases come in contact with each other, there is a diffusion takes place. So in this case, when you're putting a positive pressure gases with the positive pressure, so you will have dead space will be increased as compared to ventilation of the alveoli. So it means it will try to disturb the diffusion of gases. So this is a bad effect of putting the patient on a ventilator. It means you will have to find out some solution. There are solutions for it which we fiddle around with a ventilator. Then AA gradient. AA gradient is positive pressure, PaO2, partial pressure of oxygen in the alveoli and the partial pressure of oxygen in the arterial blood. If you look at their difference, so that will be increased. So we are pushing the gases into the lung, going into the alveoli, but diffusion rate is going according to the characteristic of the gas. So the diffusion is with the same rate. It means you will not get the rise of partial pressure of oxygen in the arterial blood the same as you have got the rise of partial pressure of oxygen into the alveoli. So the gap will be increased. So it means we will have to do something about it also, until unless, because the diffusion is taking place all the time. We are breathing 12 times or 15 times per minute. It doesn't mean that diffusion is taking 15 times or 20 times per minute. The diffusion is going all the time. That is the job of the functional residual capacity. Greater the functional residual capacity, the longer the gases will stay over there, the greater will be the diffusion of gases from the alveoli to the blood. Right? It doesn't make any sense. Yeah, these are the drawbacks and advantages of changes in the lung due to positive pressure ventilation. When we come to circulation, as we are putting the positive pressure into the chest, due to putting the positive pressure into the chest, the venous return from the lower part of the body, from the area below the diaphragm, that will be reduced. Because there is less difference now. There is a positive pressure in the thorax as compared to the abdomen, so the venous return is reduced, or sometimes it can be stopped also. Then again, as the positive pressure into the thorax, the venous return from the upper part of the body also reduced. It means the less blood is going into the heart. When the less blood is going into the heart, less blood will be going into the left heart. When the less blood is going into the left heart, it means less blood will be put out. So it means cardiac output will be reduced. When the cardiac output is reduced, so blood pressure will be dropped. Meaning blood pressure is nothing but cardiac output into peripheral resistance. Cardiac output is nothing but stroke volume into heart rate. So, and stroke volume is nothing, it depends on the preload, how much blood is coming into the right heart. And blood which is coming into the right heart is the blood which is coming from the periphery and coming from the upper part of the body. If that is reduced, the overall effect will be reduction in cardiac output if we don't increase the heart rate. Right. So this is first effect, the venous return is reduced. Second is pulmonary vascular resistance. You've got two types of vessel. One is a bigger vessel, then the capillary. Now, bigger vessels, when there is a negative pressure in the thorax, they pull the walls of the bigger vessel. They become more open. Their resistance will not be increased on those vessels. But if you look in small vessels, when the lungs expand, they pull the capillaries, and capillaries are elongated. It means their diameter is reduced. When the diameter is reduced, it means their resistance is increased. So that causes pulmonary hypertension. So the small vessel will be constricted and the big vessel will be dilated. The overall result will be there will be increase in pulmonary vascular resistance. When there is increase in pulmonary vascular resistance, the afterload of the right side of the heart will be decreased. And right heart out will have to face the high resistance into the pulmonary vessels. So it means the right heart will be dilated. When the right heart will be dilated, there will be greater pressure in the right heart. So whatsoever is the less venous return is coming will not be able to accommodate very easily. So then the same sequence. So as the heart has been pulled out also because of pericardium, so right heart pressure pushes the interventricular septum into the left heart. It means the capacity of the left heart will be reduced. It is not only reducing the capacity, it also making elliptical. When it's making elliptical, so instead of becoming heart, left heart like this, it becomes small like a tube. So it means its diameter is increased. When its diameter is increased, according to Laplace law, P is equal to 2T over R. What happens there? The pressure will be reduced in the left ventricle. When the pressure is reduced in the left ventricle, stroke volume is reduced. When the stroke volume is reduced, cardiac output is reduced. When the cardiac output is reduced, blood pressure drops. This is another reason of dropping the blood pressure. Patient will have hypertension with increased pulmonary vascular resistance. Right? These are the things to be thought about it when you put the patient on a ventilator. It's not an easy thing just to press the button and see now the gases are going in. So these are the things which we have to think about and find out the solution. Then there is, if you expand the lungs, it will have a pressure on the heart itself. It will, the heart dilates. So there will be limitation of dilatation of the heart when we are putting the gas during inspiration into the lung. It will try to depress the heart. That is called cardiac tamponade effect on it. That will also reduce the performance of the heart. So the patient, in some of the patients who have got high pressure development into the lung and has got some cardiac problem also, so this is a problem, more problem in these patients. On the one hand, heart is not effectively contracting. On the other hand, and during diastole, it cannot dilate more because there is a tamponade effect on it. So that will further drop the blood pressure also. Right? Then the release of negative inotropic effect. There are substances which are released from the heart which will have negative inotropic effect on the heart because of positive pressure into the thorax. So that has to be considered as well. Now what happens to kidney? One thing is simple, that you have got a positive pressure into the thorax, that is hindering the venous return from the abdominal viscera, that will be hindering the venous return from the kidney because there will be venous congestion. Kidneys cannot drain the proper blood which is on the venous side. So that will reduce the arteriovenous difference. When arteriovenous difference is reduced, glomerular filtration is reduced. When the glomerular filtration is reduced, there will be less urine production. This is a purely mechanical effect you see in these patients. Because of reduction in arteriovenous pressure in the kidney, you will have a low GFR. When there is low GFR, so low urine production. And when there is a low GFR, there will be more absorption of water along with the sodium. So that will have having the retention of sodium will have again bad effect on the heart also. So this is what happens in the kidney. And second thing is sodium retention. This is because of low GFR. If you look at this whole table, whole cycle, now if you are putting patient on mechanical ventilation, that will increase the venous vein pressure and that will reduce the arterial pressure. That will lead to reduction in renal perfusion. That will lead to reduction in GFR. That will cause low urine output. On the other hand, now if there is renal perfusion reduced, renin-angiotensin system comes into action. There will be more production of renin. When there is more production of renin, there will be more production of aldosterone. We have discussed this in detail when we are doing this water and electrolyte balance, renin-angiotensin system. Now then there will be ADH secretion is also increased. And ANF is a atrial natriuretic factor which is secreted from the atria, from the both atria of the heart. When the atria are distended due to normally, when the atria are distended, so they secrete ANF, then BNF, then CNF. So we concentrate on ANF. What does the ANF do? It sends a message to proximal tubule. Don't let the water to be reabsorbed. It stops or it reduces the absorption of sodium along with the water from the proximal tubule. It means it tends to get rid of water. So that water which is 70% absorbed normally from the proximal tubule, it might be reduced to 50%. So then there will be more production of urine. That is a normal, natural protective mechanism. If the patient goes into a heart failure, ANF is produced, that tries to get rid of water through the kidney. But in case of this, as the AT are not extended, because there is less venous return, because then there will be less ANF production. When there is less ANF production, it will absorb more in the proximal tubule. When it absorbs more in the proximal tubule, there will be less urine production. That will take the person into oliguria. Now, ANF also stimulates the renal system. ANF also have action on the collecting duct also. This is a separate topic. These natriuretic factors, 3 natriuretic factors. So these are very important. Then ADH. ADH is also somehow has got a modulating factors from the heart due to reduction of pressure of the blood in the heart chamber. So there are some modulating substances are secreted and they control the ADH. What does the ADH do? ADH will cause vasoconstriction and it will increase the permeability of a collecting tubular cells to absorb water. So that will also contribute towards the oliguria. So overall effect is when you put the patient on a ventilator, you should expect the patient to go into oliguria. So you will take up step. Take up the step by giving more fluids and take up the step by using diuretics also. Because we can't keep the patient in oliguria. Oliguria is only labeled if the person produces urine less around about 0.5 ml per kilogram per hour. Normal urine production is 1 ml per kilogram per hour. When the urine production goes down to 0.5 ml per kilogram per hour, it is called oliguria. When it is further reduced to 0.2 ml per kilogram per hour, it is called anuria. Because that water which is coming in the form of urine is 0.2 ml. It is secretory water of renal tubular epithelium. Then there are humoral changes. There are some humoral substances. One thing is again decreased ANF. Then there is a renin activity, renin-angiotensin system. Then aldosterone activity. What does the aldosterone do? Aldosterone acts on every cell of the body. It helps in reabsorption of sodium along with water, and in exchange the potassium is lost. This is in every cells of the body. Now there will be variable effect of ADH. I have told you there will be modulating factors which are released from the heart. They affect on the level of ADH. Now extravascular lung water. Now as there is pulmonary hypertension, the blood flow into the lung on the whole is reduced, but if the pulmonary hypertension is there, water from the vessel is coming into the lung. And this is again stalling forces, they affect the movement of the water from the vessels to the interstitial compartment, then into the alveolar compartment. Now this water, God has put big baskets of lymphatics around the alveoli in the whole of the lung. It has got the richest lymphatic supply. So it is only the lymphatics which take that water through the azygos vein, they empty into the superior vena cava. That's what happens normally. Now in these patients, when there is a positive pressure to the thorax, it will hinder the activity of the lymphatics. It will, because there will be higher pressure on the venous side, because the lymphatics has to drain into the vein. There will be reduction in the pressure gradient. So there will be reduction in the flow of the lymphatic into the blood. But lymphatics has got a valve. Lymphatics has got a valve. And once the water has gone into the lymphatic, they cannot come back. So they try to compensate it, these valves. So the patient doesn't suffer that much. But if the person has got severe lung disease, then this is effective. But what we say is that when we put the patient on a PEEP, it can make it worse. But we think that it improves the diffusion of oxygen by putting the patient on a PEEP. But actually, the exact mechanism by which it improves the diffusion of oxygen is when it PEEP distends the alveoli. On the one hand, the positive pressure into the lung, which we are putting with a ventilator. On the other hand, we are leaving the PEEP there, positive and negative pressure. It keeps the alveoli inflated. So the alveoli size will be increased. Even if there is a water, there will be more space created through which the diffusion is taking place. That improves the PaO2. That improves the delivery of oxygen. But the blood, water will be also, due to positive pressure into the alveoli, will be little bit returned back, but returned back through the lymphatics, not through the pulmonary veins. It is the lymphatics which 100% drain the water which has collected into the lung. Now, if you, in a normal person, in a heart patient, you have put the patient on a ventilator, you are giving a PEEP. Now, PEEP is positive and expiratory pressure. That will add to the pressure which is in the central vein. So, it has to be everything, whether it is a liquid or a gas, they move according to pressure gradient. Now, lymphatics should have a higher pressure than the venous pressure into the superior cava to empty it. Now, if you increase the pressure in the superior cava by putting a PEEP also, then it will not be lymphatics will not be able to drain into the vein. It means the water will accumulate into the lung. When increase of PEEP make the lung water or edema worse, it means it's a resistant edema. You should think about it, how much positive pressure created by your ventilation, how much pressure is increased by putting the PEEP on it. So the PEEP should be optimum. You cannot put large PEEP and hindering the water which is being drained by the lymphatics from the alveoli. So one should be very careful putting the patient on a PEEP and see what is the effect, whether edema is clearing or the edema is becoming worse. If edema is becoming worse, reduce the PEEP, come to lowest level and let the lymphatics drain into the central vein, right? These are the few points one has to keep in when you are putting the patient on a ventilator and treating congestive heart failure or treating the patient with a pulmonary edema. Now, barotrauma, volutrauma and biotrauma. Whenever you put the patient on a ventilator, always keep three traumas in your mind. One is barotrauma. Baro means pressure. Note, if there is a trauma to the lungs and causing pneumothorax because of high pressure into the alveoli, that's called barotrauma. Now, if the pressure is not increased, but the volume is increased and it stretches the alveoli, so the gas can pass through the stretched cells out. That can also cause pneumothorax without damaging the walls of the alveoli. Third thing is a biotrauma. As I've told so many times, there are 43 types of cells in the lung. So, as we are ventilating a patient against the natural way of breathing, so it is bound to affect those 43 cells also. So, different type of substances like prostaglandins, bradykinin and other things, so they will be affected and will have a variable effect on the body. So that's what happens in ARDS. So that's called biotrauma. It is because of positive pressure into the thorax. Now, so you have to keep 2-3 things in your mind. One is the plateau pressure. The PIP, on the dial, whatever the pressure with each breath appears, that is called peak inspiratory pressure. At the end of inspiration, if you look at the pressure, that is called plateau pressure. That is the pressure at the alveoli. That's more important than looking at the PIP, because at this pressure, it should not go more than 30 centimeters of water. Otherwise, there is the danger of barotrauma. Or in case of COPD patient, there is the danger of volutrauma also. Biotrauma is going on with the positive pressure. It's one thing. And secondly, if you increase the inspiratory phase to improve the oxygenation, always keep an eye whether there is a problem with the lung or not, whether there are higher chances of barotrauma if you increase the inspiratory phase. because you are keeping for longer time positive pressure into the lung during inspiration. So there is a more chances of going into barotrauma with these patients. So keep an eye on inspiratory phase. Then VD over VT ratio. So if you increase the VD, there are chances of more having a biotrauma also. So these three things you keep in your mind, thinking when you put the patient on the ventilator, think about barotrauma, volutrauma and biotrauma. Work of breathing. If there is a laminar flow is in lines, parallel lines, without any if it is not in a streamline, that becomes turbulent flow. Now turbulent flow creates more resistance. If there is a more resistance, lung will have to work more. When the lung has to work more, lung needs more energy. So with the laminar flow, it's only 2% increase of work of breathing. But if the gases become turbulent, they will become only if there is a constriction, or if there is a restriction, or if there is a resistance, like a frictional resistance, airway resistance, lung and chest wall compliance problems. That can cause turbulence of the flow which is going into the lung. So that increases the work of lung. It means in addition to our objective of ventilating is to have better PaO2. But in addition to that, if it increases the work of the lung, it means you will need to have more oxygen in the body to fulfill the demand of lung tissue also. So this thing we'll have to keep in mind also. With the laminar flow, it's only 2% increase in work of breathing. With the turbulent flow, it is about 20 times more. This 20% of work of breathing is increased. Now, what is the effect on other organs, like intracranial pressure? Now, you are putting positive pressure into the thorax. That positive pressure in the thorax will hinder the venous return from the upper part of the body, because it will intracranial pressure and the thoracic pressure difference is very much reduced. The venous pressure into the cranium and the venous pressure into the thorax, the pressure gradient is reduced. It will be some of the resistance will be increased for the flow of the venous blood from the cranium to the chest. So it means there will be accumulation of venous blood into the cranium, and it will increase the ICP, intracranial pressure. Now, ICP, intracranial pressure, is another topic, separate topic. I think after finish this ventilation, I'll do the anesthesia for neurosurgery. That is the topic, because there's a lot of physiology involved in that. So I'll be able to explain more about intracranial pressure. Now, blood gas changes, of course, blood gas changes, ventilation is for this purpose. So we want to improve the blood gases. Then paralytic ileus. Any patient who is put on a ventilator, at least 24 to 72 hours, some people say 72 to 48 hours, 48 hours to 72 hours, don't start any enteral feeding. Don't use the gut. There are 4 reasons for it. One reason is because of less venous return from the abdominal viscera, there will be congestion of the venous blood into the gut, in the gut vessels also. So it means the gut movement and function will not be normal. Number 1. Number 2, due to increased pressure into the gut, because when the diaphragm comes down, the intra-abdominal pressure is increased. Due to increased pressure, the lymphatic drainage will be reduced also. So it means the gut is not ready to be functioning normally. And the third factor is, as there is autonomic nervous system disturbance, it is affecting the baroreceptor in the heart. It is affecting the baroreceptors here. So it means it is disturbing the autonomic nervous system. And the gut is nothing but under the control of autonomic nervous system. The sphincters are controlled by sympathetic system, and the gut wall is controlled by parasympathetic system by cholinergic activity. As that is disturbed, so the gut is not moving properly, gut rather goes into paralytic ileus. So if you put the things into the stomach, so there are chances of regurgitation and aspiration. so that nutrition is useless. That will cause another problem. So this thing one has to think about it. So then is the metabolic changes also in the body which takes place, which affect the gut movement also. These are 4 factors one should keep in mind: autonomic nervous system, venous congestion, and the lymphatic congestion, and there is some metabolic change in the lung takes place, and there is a mechanical effect also. When you diaphragm is pulled down during inspiration, it will have pressure on the stomach and the viscera. And when you have a pressure on the stomach and the viscera, the stomach will not be able to empty it properly into the gut. That will also cause increase in intraluminal pressure of the gut, and that will cause a disturbance in the gut also. So all these things combined together, we can say there will be paralytic ileus type of picture in a patient. So after 72 hours, you assess if there is peristalsis have come to normal, then you can start with your enteral nutrition. The best way of giving nutrition is by enteral nutrition, because in addition to giving nutrition to the body, you want to give nutrition to the mucosa of the wall of the gut also. That comes from the lumen of the gut. So that has to be, because gut is an organ, gut is not a tube. एक साइड पे डालें या दूसरी साइड पे निकल जाए. No, it is an organ. Rather, I'll say it is an endocrine organ also. So it secretes substances which act on the distance, act on some other place, not acting on itself, right? So these things one has to keep in mind. So in conclusion, this we say the cardiac output is reduced, it improves congestive cardiac failure, work of breathing is reduced when we paralyze the patient and give the lungs or chest wall to have a rest. It improves the gas exchange and it improves the respiratory failure, but it increases the intracranial pressure, urinary output is reduced, oliguria, and there is a danger of barotrauma, and AA gradient is increased. Partial pressure of oxygen in the alveoli minus partial pressure of oxygen in the blood. That is increased. So this is the physiological effect of ventilation when you are ventilating a patient with low frequency positive pressure ventilation, right? So next, just a touch of the substance is high frequency positive pressure ventilation. Now high frequency ventilation is, so in the low frequency we always keep an eye on the time constant, on the compliance and resistance of the lung. But the high frequency ventilation, this time constant doesn't disturb much when we choose to ventilate the patient very high frequency. What is high frequency ventilation? In adult, if it is rate is more than 4 times the normal rate. For example, if you are breathing 15 times per minute, multiply with 4. If you are breathing 60 times or more, if you are ventilating 60 times or more, this is called high frequency ventilation. In case of neonates, normal rate is around about 30. And its high frequency ventilation will be, if you multiply it with 4, 120 at least, more than 120. So that we label it as a high frequency positive pressure ventilation. Now, goals of this, putting the patient on a high frequency ventilation is, we want to reduce the transpulmonary pressure difference. As we had the problem with the low frequency, because it creates a difference of pressure in the thorax and the abdominal viscera, it creates a pressure problem of pressure between the thorax and the extrathoracic area. But this high frequency positive pressure ventilation does not have a much effect. There is effect, but it depends what type of high frequency positive pressure ventilation you are giving. And it will have a small tidal volume. If you increase the rate, you will have small tidal volume. So that will reduce the peak inspiratory pressure. And there is less chances of barotrauma. And there is a less chances of reduction of cardiac output also. So it's a beautiful thing. Why not to do this? But it has got limitations also. With giving high frequency positive pressure, you increase the rate. Then you reduce the tidal volume. So the pressure in the thorax will be reduced. So cardiac output will be not reduced. And the same way, barotrauma, there is danger of barotrauma will be gone also. So it looks beautiful, isn't it? But it's not commonly used because there are three types of high frequency positive pressure ventilation. One is high frequency positive pressure ventilation, other is high frequency jet ventilation, and other is high frequency oscillation. In my big book, before that there was another edition. I wrote very detailed physiological changes of this thing, what is the mechanism. Then I removed it from there because we are not using it. People will be confused because this topic, we don't use it routinely. It is used on the children, but routinely on adults it's not used. Very rarely it is used. Now, when these three things, and these are the people, high frequency positive pressure ventilation actually originated from Sweden. It is Oberg and Sjöström. They started it. Then there's high frequency jet ventilation. This is a different way of doing it. Then high frequency oscillation. If you see the patient put on a high frequency oscillation, you will be surprised the patient they're hardly in chest movement. They're going like this. The gases are going like this into the lung. So this is Taylorian way of diffusion of gases in a gaseous medium. So it's a beautiful explanation, physiological explanation for it also. But they improve. Patients they improve. I mean, it's not only the tidal volume which improves the oxygenation, it is the delivery of oxygen. Whether it's giving in a small boluses into the alveoli, and then there's a pressure gradient between the alveoli and the blood that causes diffusion of gas, and it is a characteristic of the gas which affects the diffusion. So in high frequency positive pressure ventilation, frequency is 60 to 120 per minute. This is the rate. But when we are using high frequency positive pressure ventilation, the tidal volume is 3 to 5 ml per kilogram. Normally 6 to 8 or 8 to 10 ml. But in high frequency 3 to 5. So tidal volume is reduced. Then high frequency jet ventilation, the rate is 60 to 240. It's around about 200 to 240. So then the tidal volume comes to 2 to 5 ml per kilogram. When it's high frequency oscillation, the rate grows from 180 to 1200 per minute. You can see it will just like this. And here the tidal volume is 1 to 3 ml per kilogram. Hardly any tidal volume, very little tidal volume. So this is worth seeing it. But in very rare cases we use it. Personally, I have not used here in Pakistan because we don't have a special ventilator, but these ventilators can be made to deliver high frequency positive pressure ventilation only because we increase the rate up to 60. You can do that. Now, specific application for this in anesthesia, when they're doing surgery on conducting airways and lungs. So you can put these on high frequency positive pressure ventilation. Mechanically, it does not disturb the surgeon. Then if you're doing laryngoscopy, microsurgery, laser surgery on the larynx, then this is one way of giving anesthesia. And there is a tracheal resection or tracheostomy, then this can be used also. Then bronchoscopy, through the bronchoscopy, you can give jet ventilation, put the needle down here at the cricothyroid membrane, and then start the jet ventilation. You will hardly know the patient is under, and there will not be movement of much of the respiratory system. Then at the time of resuscitation, percutaneous transtracheal jet ventilation with 100% oxygen, right? Then direct delivery of oxygen below the vocal cords, which we do even otherwise also. Intrinsic PEEP. Then when you want to have an intrinsic PEEP in this, then pulsatile expired gas flow. This, when it is going pulsatile flow, so there is less danger of aspiration also. So this is the beauty of this high frequency positive pressure ventilation. So clinical applications is in ICU, like a bronchopleural fistula. So they use this on a patient on this. Other advantages, like if you are weaning mode also, this is one of the weaning mode also, putting them on a high frequency positive pressure ventilation. So, or if you have got endobronchial suction, at that time you want to keep the patient sleep, and you can use this high frequency oscillation. So these are the few things about high frequency positive pressure ventilation. Now there are special clinical situations in which how should we do the ventilation, normal ventilation, low frequency positive pressure ventilation. There are special situations like if the patient has got respiratory distress syndrome. We have already discussed it, ARDS, in detail, but just to touch that. The goals are we should have adequate oxygenation. We should have adequate DO2, delivery of oxygen. Then work of breathing should be reduced. And we want to avoid excessive peak inspiratory pressure. Avoid high FiO2. So that's why we put these patients who are with the respiratory distress syndrome on the ventilator. And settings, with simple pressure control mechanical ventilation, simple pressure control mechanical ventilation plus PEEP could be pressure control mechanical ventilation with ARV. I will add some more pressure control mechanical ventilation with IRV plus PEEP also. Then there are some other way of doing it, differential lung ventilation also. Then you can do induction of hypercarbia also. Those are the different things to do with the respiratory distress syndrome or ARDS. The other condition which commonly comes is obstructive airway disease. In obstructive airway disease, we are doing the positive pressure ventilation. Our objective is to support the oxygenation. Right? Second thing is we want to assist the ventilation. Patient has got COPD, is tired. Now he needs ventilatory assistance. So what are the goals? And then idea is to approximate the pH to normal pH. Just bring the pH to normal. Even if you keep little bit of high PCO2, even if you let little bit hypoxia there because they are living on the hypoxic drive. So we want to just help them out and we want to normalize the pH. That's why we put them on positive pressure ventilation. Our setting should be VT, tidal volume should be initially about 6 to 7 mil or 10 mil, then gradually reduce it. You come down because high tidal volumes are not good for these patients. Then IE ratio. You increase the expiratory path, expiratory time in these patients because there is an expiratory obstruction in these patients. Those who have got obstructive lung disease, they have got expiratory obstruction. So you give longer time for the gases to come out. If there is an obstruction anywhere, whether it is inspiratory or expiratory, as a general rule, if there is an obstruction, inspiratory obstruction, you increase the inspiratory period. If there is a low compliance, you increase the pressure. But if there is obstruction, you increase the period. By increasing the pressure, you cannot bypass the obstruction. You cannot get the objective by increasing the pressure. It means you will have to increase the period. If there is an expiratory obstruction, you increase the expiratory period, as we do in asthma, chronic obstructive airway disease. There is an expiratory obstruction. So when you put them on the ventilator, you increase the expiratory period. So it gives some time for the carbon dioxide to come out, gives some time for the gases to come out of the lung. Right. So there is always keep in your mind that these patients can have an induced PEEP also. If your expiratory period is not adequate, some of the gases will accumulate in the lung back and they will go on stretching the alveoli. They can cause pneumothorax. They can cause the bursting of the alveoli also. They can cause the barotrauma. Right? So we should be very careful of if we are breathing, ventilating normally, suddenly PO2 goes down and suddenly the chest becomes silent. The first thing you do is auscultate clinically, then do the X-ray. X-ray will give you the answer immediately. If the immediately SpO2 comes down, PO2 comes down, and there is a problem for the entry of gas, do the X-ray and that will give you the information. Right. Now, if there is asymmetrical lung disease, so if asymmetrical lung disease, it means there is some problem. One part of the lung, the other part of the lung is normal. So the best way is to put them on differential lung ventilation. You put the patient on 2 ventilators, or you choose the time, because if you are putting normally positive pressure ventilation. So if one part of the lung is severely diseased, so that will be getting less gas as compared to normal lung. And if you are giving more gas into the normal lung, it means you are creating a dead space effect over there. It means you are increasing the VD over VT. So that will cause dead space effect. That will disturb the blood gases. So that's not a good thing. So, but the positioning is very important. The down with the less the patient who is having a lung problem, so dependent position will be in the normal lung, and the upper portion will be, if you are changing the position, upper portion would be diseased part or diseased lung. So differential lung ventilation is the answer to it. So if there is asymmetrical disease, so you put one tube in one lung and other tube in another lung, put on 2 ventilators, and according to their compliance and resistance. Congestive heart failure. Now, you want to reduce the work of breathing and the load on the heart. And you want to improve the oxygen, and you want to improve the pulmonary edema. These are 3 objectives when the congestive heart patient comes to you in the ICU. You want to put them on a ventilator. You put them on IPV, intermittent positive pressure ventilation, and it's better to do the square wave type of ventilation, square wave pattern. Normally we give sine wave, gradually accelerating type of. So go during inspiration, gas is going like this, and during expiration, gas is coming. This is a sine wave. The square wave is the gas go in, decelerating type. Go in, then stay in the lung, then come down. This is called square period. So this is the best way, because that period which remains static, that period will keep the positive pressure for a certain time into the alveoli, and that pushes the fluid out, whether through the lymphatics or whether through the capillaries, most probably through the lymphatics due to positive pressure. So this is called square wave pattern. So we have got on our ventilator these provisions. If you go there, you can see, and I might be knowing it, I usually go and fiddle around with it. See? So that's the best way of putting these patients with a congestive heart failure. Now, if you have got myocardial ischemia, you have to put the patient on ventilator. The objective is to reduce the work of breathing. So when you reduce the work of breathing, you reduce the oxygen requirement of the myocardium and oxygen requirement of the lung. Because on one hand, there is already DO2 is reduced because of reduction in blood pressure. So on the other hand, if it is increased demand, so that puts more load on the heart. That depresses the heart. So it's better we reduce the work of breathing by putting the patient on a ventilator and keeping the patient quiet. And second objective is we increase the oxygenation. We increase the PaO2 and look at the hemoglobin. Then you calculate the delivery of oxygen. Then you look at the VO2, how much has been extracted. Then you look at the lactate, whether the oxygen is being used at the cell level or not. That will solve the whole problem. Strategy is as if we are treating the patient with a congestive heart failure. The same pattern. We'll have to put on the square wave pattern and try to give the lung and the heart rest. Now, if a person has got neuromuscular disease, but there is an intact respiratory drive, so you put these patients on higher tidal volume. Give them higher tidal volume as compared to the other patients you are giving. So avoid the air hunger. You give such a tidal volume at which the patient starts compromising with it. So you don't need to paralyze these patients. Patient has got already neuromuscular problem. There is a neuromuscular disease. कौन सी होती है एग्जाम्पल के तौर पे न्यूरोमस्कुलर डिजीज? क्या हाँ आते हैं हमारे पास? अच्छा हाँ तो उनको we don't have to paralyze them. We don't have to because their muscles are weak, but their respiratory center is intact. Patient will try to breathe. If the patient is trying to breathe, you are not giving adequate amount into the lung, that will create a air hunger. Patient will be fighting to have gas in. So it's better to give them higher tidal volume so that his brain center will be satisfied. So you fulfill the requirement of the brain center. So it's about 10 to 12 milliliter per kilogram, and ventilate in such a way that we should have a normal pH. Our target is have to normal pH. Our target is to have because there is no problem in the diffusion of gases, there is no problem in the lung tissue, there is no problem with the compliance resistance of the lung. They are normal. Only thing is the muscles are paralyzed. The neuromuscular problem is there. Patient cannot breathe properly. So it's a problem of the cage. It's not a problem of center. So we'll have to keep the oxygenation going on. Right. Now, when you put on the controlled mechanical ventilation, what are the monitorings you will be doing? Chest radiograph, post-intubation, and if the patient becomes deteriorated. It is not a routine test to be done every day. If your blood gases are affected and you want to see why there is effect, look at the lung chest first. Then after you intubate the patient, immediately you do the X-ray chest. Then you every day or sometimes twice a day, depending on the condition of the patient, depending on the ABGs, you do the blood gases, whether it is required twice a day or not. Then look at the vital signs. Vital signs, as written always in the chart, vital signs are normal. So patient is okay. In the wards, when you go and look at the chart, you say vital signs are normal. What are the vital signs? पता ही आपको. Then you always keep an eye on the inspirative pressure, PIP. Your eye should be, nurse's eyes and doctor's eyes should be moving like this on ventilator, and the patient should be going like this. It means you should not leave the patient who is on a ventilator, not at all. Person should be sitting there all the time. If the nurse has to go somewhere, so ask the other nurse to sit there. Okay? This is a very serious thing. If the patient is on a ventilator and you leave it, right? Anything can happen to the patient. So to avoid these things, that's why the alarm systems came into action also. Because never ever put the alarms off. Keep the patient on. All the alarms should be on. You change the range of that. Even for blood pressure, pulse, SpO2 and other things also. Alarms should always be on. Then pulse oximetry, that will automatically will tell you. Then ventilator alarms. Keep on eye. When there is alarm, look at that. What is that? Is it giving about oxygen? Is it giving about PIP? Or is it about tidal volume? Or other things also? You should always look at it and don't ignore it.